We've had some lengthy discussions recently, so we're going to keep it to quick hits today. It's the Captain's Log edition. The FMC had their commission meeting this week, so we'll cover that, and a few other hot topics. So let's go. Hi, welcome to By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies. And I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So normally we would be going right into our top 3 stories of the week. But this week, everything's a top stories, so settle in as we embark on the Captain's Log edition of By Land and By Sea. So story number 1, we talked about this last week. It was on our top 3 stories. The FMC had their commission meeting this week. They had delayed it previously, but we finally had the meeting, and we actually got some pretty interesting information from the independent federal agency this week. So on the agenda, they had both a public session and a closed session, if you will. We got an update on the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative from Commissioner Carl Bentzel. We covered this report last week on By Land and By Sea. I encourage you to go listen to that. But really what he covered, he really covered a vast majority of the industry. And I think, if nothing else, go back, or certainly read the report, but if nothing else, go back and re-watch. If you haven't watched it, watch for the first time. The 18 meetings that involved over 80 different participants from all over the industry, all over the supply chain, responsible for moving a container from origin to destination. It culminates with a data summit, June 2022, but really he went from November 2021, December, all the way through to June 1st, conducting these meetings. And they are on the FMC YouTube page. You can see them. They're about an hour long for each stakeholder group. But there is such great information in there. You almost get to kind of peek behind the curtain of these different stakeholder groups and how they handle data, what they need, what they have, what they could use. It's really interesting discussion, and I encourage you to, if you haven't done it in a while, I find myself going back there and just popping into some of those too, just to refresh my memory on what they were saying. They're really interesting, and the amount of work that he put into this is really great. And we are seeing a digitization, a data sharing movement in the industry. I love to see it, right? I love to see it. I think that we're moving in the right direction. I think that efficiency will come from obviously data sharing. And hopefully we can all speak the same language. And that's something that Commissioner Bentzel is really, really trying to push here, is that we need to be speaking the same language. He keeps saying the same lexicon. We need standards, right? We need to kind of be speaking the same language. So it was a great report. It was a great update. Interesting conversation from the commissioners. They seem to all be generally in favor of the work and appreciative of the work. So the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative turning into the Maritime Transportation Data System. Check it out. I think we're going to see this one kind of percolate for a while, but there was some great information, raw data wise, from this overall initiative. The second thing on the agenda was a staff briefing for the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. I expect that this is going to be on the agenda pretty much every single time we have a meeting from now until we get at least the rulemakings done. But certainly as they kind of take some wins, if you will, in the OSRA 22 world. So they did say that we're still waiting on the final rule language, right, of the detention demurrage billing requirements. Haven't seen that come out yet. They said it's not quite ready yet. They also said that the supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations isn't quite ready yet. Technically, they have a year to be finished with the whole rulemaking. I don't know if we're going to see. Well, we might see the detention and demurrage billing requirements finished up. June 16th, right, would be the 1 year mark that requirement is for. We're certainly not going to see that for the supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking because they're going to do another round that likely will have a 30, maybe 60-day open comment period. So either way, we'd be pushed up and over our June date now that it's May 5th. But the detention and demurrage billing requirements, that could come out as a final language in the next month or so. So we'll see. I'm going to keep watching that. But as of right now, no real updates there. The FMC did get an update on charge complaints, stating that the FMC has actually helped in waiving or refunding over $1 million in fees through the charge complaints process. Interesting to note, they've helped in waiving or refunding. They haven't actually necessarily required the waiving or refunding on most all of those $1 million in fees, but it's still a win. Remember, charge complaints are more of a law enforcement mechanism rather than a fully adjudicated, like, traditional filing of a lawsuit. But really the great part of charge complaints is that they were supposed to be a much faster process, and that's proving to be true. We've only had this for 10 months now, June 16th, basically, almost 11 months. And they've gone through and had over 200 charge complaints initially filed with the FMC when we got our last update, which was a few months ago. I can only imagine that's increased since. Not all of those 200 were properly filed, but the ones that were, all but one of them ended up resulting in a waiver or a refunding through this charge complaints process before it even met the door of the Office of Enforcement, which is the one is going through on a notice to show cause. But other than that I think that this is a well achieved win for the Federal Maritime Commission. Congress created the charge complaints. The FMC jumped into action, created a process, and they were able to do it. I mean, federal government often gets critiqued, right? Criticized for being a little bit slower. The FMC was very quick in this. They still say that they have to do a rulemaking to fully codify exactly the process, but this process is being proven through immediate use. And June 16th, it was immediately available. So the FMC had to work fast, and they did. And they can now say that they are helping to refund or waive over $1 million in fees through the charge complaints process. From what I've heard through different channels, people seem to like the process. They put out that webinar. I've covered charge complaints, how to file a charge complaint. It's pretty fascinating. It's a pretty interesting new kind of law enforcement mechanism, like I said. The third thing that was on the open agenda was a staff briefing from the Bureau of Enforcement, Investigations, and Compliance. They were doing a little bit of shifting. So again, remember that the BEIC used to be the Bureau of Enforcement. Now it has the Bureau of Enforcement, Investigations, and Compliance. Excuse me. So they gave kind of an update. So BEIC, in terms of numbers, in fiscal year 2022, executed 191 investigations, 204 enforcement matters, 59 compliance matters, and 3 formal enforcement proceedings. That's pretty great. That shows that the Office of Enforcement, Investigations, and Compliance is out there looking for bad acting. It doesn't have to be, it could be a tip, it could be a report of violation of the Shipping Act that's not necessarily tied to a litigation. At least one of them we know was, well, actually, I don't know if that would be counted under 2022, but at least one of the 200 charge complaints filed ended up going to Office of Enforcement as a notice to show cause. But that's pretty good. They say the overwhelming majority of this activity was obviously focused on ocean carriers and marine terminal operators, two of their regulated entities. And they said that additionally more than $3 million in civil penalties had been collected as a result of the commission efforts since 2021. That $3 million is significant because the year before they had, oh gosh, they said it in the meeting. I want to say maybe it was less than $1,000 collected in civil penalties. So it's significant. I don't think that and to compare 3 million to that very small amount previously, I don't think is also fair because I think that there was less coming in the 2020 immediate when everyone was trying to figure out what was going on. I don't think the 3 million is them necessarily getting more active and in a bad way. I think that they are just getting more active as a enforcement mechanism, making sure to clean up bad decisions, bad acting, whatever it was, that the Bureau of Enforcement Investigations and Compliance sees. They also had a section that was closed to the public. I can imagine that's going to be the ongoing enforcement investigations and compliance matters that are open. They obviously couldn't report that out in the public section. That was in the closed section. So it overall was a great hearing. It was pretty long, but I encourage you to watch these either live or on their YouTube channel on recording. They're pretty interesting. They really are. You can kind of jump around if you don't want to listen to a certain section, but they really are pretty interesting hearings. So story number 2. So we're still waiting on the detention demurrage billing requirements, the final rulemaking language from the FMC. But in the meantime, we've seen some preemptive action from some of the regulated entities out there in the wild. So first, we saw carriers were announcing that they would be waiving detention and demurrage charges on days that the terminal was otherwise closed or non-operational due to holidays or other port closure events. But now we're actually seeing that the terminals themselves are making similar changes. So JOC is reporting that the Port of Houston has announced that they're going to stop charging storage fees on import containers that stay too long at its marine terminal when the truck gates are closed. But in turn, the port is going to be reportedly increasing its charge on some boxes when the gates are actually open. So to me, it feels like it's a little bit of a shift in fee collection, but I mean, I guess one could argue that the increased fee is an increase in the pressure, like using the incentive principle. So when the doors are open, come get your stuff. Otherwise, you're going to incur this even higher fee. JOC is reporting that the port actually said that these increased fees are needed to ensure shippers won't let cargo go stagnant and slow down port operations. And the port's actually tying this increase to the incentive principle that the FMC has, I mean, we've heard it time and time again. They've firmly stuck by and promoted as the guiding principle in determining the need for D&D charges. It will certainly see it in the final rulemaking, and it was included in OSRA 2022. But interesting that the industry itself is being a little preemptive. We don't even have the final language out yet, and now the industry is starting to make some of these changes that the FMC has really said, look, you can't charge if no one can pick it up based on that incentive principle. So interesting. I'm going to keep watching this. I think that these are interesting moves by the industry, and the fact that they're taking the initiative to do it before the final language comes out. Story number 3. The National Shipper Advisory Committee is scheduled to meet next week. I reported on it last week. I just think these are so interesting. These federal advisory committees, especially this one at the FMC, the National Shipper Advisory Committee. It's a new thing for the FMC to have advisory committees, FACAs, federal advisory committees. So the fact that they have this National Shipper Advisory Committee, I think, is a great thing. And I hope that we can all kind of pay attention and watch what they're doing, because they've had some pretty good, interesting recommendations. And it seems that the FMC tends to respond, at least in a, yes, we hear you, yes, we're working on it, here's what we plan to do, here's how we plan to continue to respond kind of constructive way. The recommendations have included government inspections. They've included earliest return dates. They've included Ocean Carrier Advisory Committee, which would be, I guess, in partnership to this National Shipper Advisory Committee, which is where all these advisories and recommendations are coming from. They covered dwell fees. They covered intermodal oversight of through bills of lading. And like I said, the FMC has been mostly responding to these, saying, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to plan to do, here's what we're going to be adopting this, we're not going to be adopting this. They really do kind of respond with real responses, not just thanks for your submission. they really are thoughtful with how they're responding. I mentioned this whole National Shipper Advisory Committee last week, but again, I'm just mentioning it. I think that this is something that people should pay attention to. So May 11th is their next meeting. They're going to be live streaming it on the FMC's YouTube page. Reminder that this is IKEA, this is Tractor Supply, this is Cargill, this is Tyson Food, this is American Commodity Company, Gemini Shipper Group, Office Depot and Target, Ocean Spray Cranberries. There's lots of variety of companies that are included in this Shipper Advisory Committee. So National Shipper Advisory Committee. So pay attention here. They're doing some pretty cool stuff. All right, story number 4. Alliance capacity is standing around 39%. So Container News is reporting that Alphaliner's latest report reviewed the actual operational capacity of alliances, not just the perceived market share that is usually used as the number here. And Alphaliner is showing that the major container alliances control only about 39% based on the actual vessel capacity in use. So remember, alliances are basically vessel sharing agreements, right? So they can't talk about rates. They still compete with each other, but they're sharing that space because it otherwise went unused. Obviously, this is kind of a strange thing to wrap our heads around because the past few years, people have been screaming for space on vessels. But prior to that, there were a lot of empty vessels sailing the ocean blue. So that's where vessel sharing agreements really came into play. And that's when alliances in 2014, 2015, and even earlier were born, because we as shippers benefited from, or we as consumers, I should say, benefited from the shipper's ability to use new routes or the carrier's ability to vessel share and then dedicate their vessels that otherwise would just be floating along 50% next to the other 50% capacity vessel over into diversified ports of entry, alternative routing. It just became a better thing for overall flow of the ecosystem of the supply chain. So usually when ocean alliances are discussed, the 80% market share figure is used. So the top 9 represent 80% market share. These 9 carriers that are in these 3 ocean alliances, the 3 different alliance versions, 80% market share is often used, saying how can we allow these ocean alliances to continue when they represent 80%? Well, individually, each of those 3, even with the 80% figure was, 20, 30% market share. But really that was a little unfair because that was the aggregate total market share of those companies as viewed as part of the alliance. It was never really broken down saying, well, what's the actual vessel capacity that's dedicated to the vessel share? That's what Alphaliner did here. They broke it down and said, okay, so even though Maersk and MSC are part of the 2M alliance, they don't put their entire fleet into the vessel share. And so that's what they said across the board as they looked at all of the different ocean alliances out there. So we have the Alliance, THE Alliance, we have Ocean Alliance, and we have 2M, which again, remember 2M is going to be closing down by 2025. It's not entirely accurate to say it's an 80% market share that those 3 ocean alliances create. Alphaliner is saying the actual vessel capacity, 39%. Hopefully it makes you feel a little bit better. And like I said, they don't discuss rates. They just are vessel sharing. They're operationally sharing they really are supposed to be for the benefit of shippers and ultimately consumers, because if it costs less to ship something, it's going to cost less to buy something. Interesting. I like these reports. I like these stats that Alphaliner and others are looking into. I remember hearing about it last fall and hearing, I think 37% was the amount that I heard then. And just so interesting. I had never heard that. I had always really ever heard the 80% market share. Maybe I should have heard the lower number, but I hadn't. And I found that very interesting and something worth looking into. Story number 5. The JOC is reporting that in a letter dated May 2nd, so just a couple days ago, over 70 shippers, forwarders, and transportation interests sent a letter to the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, so the House T&I Committee, that the rail storage fees assessed by ocean containers moving on through bill of ladings should be clearly overseen by the FMC. So what this letter is basically saying is that they think that there's a jurisdictional gap that is a little too interpretation related, and they need to make it much more clear that the FMC can now, on those through bills of lading, be part of the rail storage fee remediation. So, and they basically are saying they should be clearly overseen by the FMC and the jurisdictional gap should be closed. So just to note that the JOC article points out that I think is also worth pointing out here, so just that we're all on the same terms and we kind of all know what's going on. So a through bill of lading, as described by the JOC, involves an ocean carrier contracting for rail service to ensure a container is delivered from origin to an inland destination in the U.S. So not just at the port, but inland destination, which is why the rail is coming into this. So the letter actually states, and JOC brings in quotes of the letter, and I'm going to read it here. While we do not suggest that railroads themselves would or should be regulated by the FMC, the railroad storage charges under through bills of lading should be more appropriately be invoiced through the ocean carriers. Rail storage charges assessed against containers moving in international commerce, an as yet unaddressed abuse of demurrage charges should clearly and formally fall within the FMC authority through an act of Congress. JOC continues in quoting the letter, we ask Congress to clarify that rail storage charges assessed under ocean bills of lading for through transportation should be billed through the contracting ocean common carrier and subject to the OSRA 22 demurrage and detention invoicing requirements. New legislation would clearly establish that rail storage charges assessed as part of through international ocean transportation are under the operational authority of the FMC and that any unreasonable charges would be governed by the requirements of OSRA 22. This is interesting. So I think that this is still a gray area of jurisdictional authority of the FMC. How far does the FMC extend in? I've heard it said through bills of lading, of course, but then I've also heard, well, of course not. So it just gets it's not exactly clear. And I think that that's what the letter is getting at. They want clarity there. They want clear jurisdictional authority, because this has come up with some of the chassis discussion that we talked about previously there's a chassis case with exclusive chassis ownership and ability to choose your own chassis as being outside of the jurisdictional authority of the FMC. Similarly, this rail storage charges has been touted as being outside of the authority of the FMC. Maybe it comes down to, do you like the FMC and what they do, or do you not, and you don't want it expanded? Because the argument is there for mission creep, meaning that the FMC might be going up and out of their jurisdiction if it's not clearly defined. And so that's what I think this letter is getting at, is saying, we want it clearly defined. We want the FMC to clearly have this authority over rail storage charges. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. All right, story number 6. This one really got me excited yesterday. I came across it. An interesting announcement out of the White House. It was an announcement of the National Standard Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technology. So the release said today, which was yesterday, the Biden-Harris administration released the U.S. government's National Standard Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies, which will strengthen both the United States Foundation to safeguard American consumers' technology and U.S. leadership and competitiveness in international standards development. So continuing on, the press release also says standards are the guidelines used to ensure that the technology Americans routinely rely on is universally safe and interoperable. This strategy will renew the United States' rules-based approach to standards development. It will also emphasize the federal government's support for international standards for critical and emerging technologies, which will help accelerate standards efforts led by the private sector to facilitate global markets, contribute to interoperability, and promote U.S. competitiveness and innovation. I'm also going to link the actual standard strategy document in the show notes here. But one section I wanted to read is the what standards are and why they matter. We've been having this discussion of standards quite a bit on the supply chain data and digitization side of really all things supply chain management, right? We've seen it at the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative report. We've seen it we've seen it as we talk about some of these green shipping corridors. We've seen it as we just kind of approach anything. It feels everything is kind of segmented and piecemeal. And so what I love to see is from the White House come out and say, no, standards are important. We have to kind of start there. And I think this overview of what standards are in this report and why they matter is an important concept to understand, certainly for the supply chain side, so that we can kind of link that application to all of these different digitization and data sharing efforts that we have going on out there. So the actual report says, this is the why, what standards are and why they matter. So from computers and smartphones to cars and light bulbs, societies rely on technology standards for everyday life. In the broadest sense, standards are the common and repeated use of rules, conditions, guidelines, and characteristics for products or related processes, practices, or production methods. They enable technology that is safe, universal, and interoperable. Standards define the requirements that make it possible for mobile phones sold in different countries to communicate across the world, for bank cards issued in one country to be recognized at an ATM in another. That's the application piece, right? You can buy a phone in the US and use it anywhere. You can use your Bank of America card in Belgium. And for cars to run on fuel purchased from any gas station. Standards also help manage risk, security, safety, privacy, and quality in the development of new innovations. In short, good standards are good for business, good for consumers, and good for society. Exactly, right? I mean, this is basically, let's streamline and synthesize all of this to make sure that it all works together. All great individual initiatives, but let's make sure that they're all working toward the same goal with the same baseline standards, right? I mean, that's exactly what it is. So the areas that the report considers to be critical and emerging technology, because remember, this is the critical and emerging technology standards discussion, are as follows. So it's communication and networking tech, semiconductors and microelectronics, which include computing, memory, and storage tech, AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning, biotechnology, positioning, navigation, and timing services, digital identity infrastructure and distributed ledger technologies, clean energy generation and storage, and quantum information technology. So pretty broad, large, kind of conceptual. I guess we're getting there, right? AI and biotechnologies. These are all pretty interesting. But then they also include a specifics application section, which I want to point out. So automated and connected infrastructure, they're referencing Internet of Things, and really they mention smart communities. But kind of the automated and connected infrastructure piqued my interest because I was like, aren't we talking about that at ports? Biobanking, collection, storage, and use of biological samples. Okay, COVID, automated, connected, and electrified transportation. So they're referencing electric vehicles, electric buses, electric cars. But this one could potentially maybe have some port ramifications. Critical minerals supply chains, referencing critical minerals needed for electric vehicles. But they said supply chains. This is kind of the only reference that I saw to supply chains here. I don't know. All right, critical and emerging technology maybe is not supply chain, but critical, I don't know. All right. That was kind of it. Cybersecurity and privacy and carbon capture, removal, utilization, storage. Look, one notably missing area is supply chain, right? But of course, I'm going to be focused on the supply chain side. I would argue that the efforts made on supply chain data sharing and digitization could really fall under the critical, definitely emerging technology. Who knows? Maybe it'll find its way into a future draft. Maybe they're listening today. All right, well, that's it for today. There's a lot going on out there, right? So stay tuned to By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain. We'll help you make sense of it all. We'll at least bring it to your attention. We'll try to figure out what it means, who's doing what. So, as always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you do have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. Otherwise, for the non-legal questions, the e-learning, and general industry information and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you want to listen to these episodes on demand, or if you missed any previous episodes, check out the podcast By Land and By Sea. If you prefer to see the video, they live on my YouTube page, By Land and By Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out the website, maritimeprofessor.com. So until next week, this is Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and By Sea. See you next time.